Paul, you're on. Paul, you're not speaking to us, right?
Chilling Paul, you are muted.
Thanks for reminding me, Leroy. Good night, everybody. Good night, comrades. Good night, Jamaicans. Good night, everyone who has joined us. We only have our presenters and a few persons on the Zoom platform, but most persons are watching this program on YouTube live. So I want to welcome everybody who has joined us on this historic occasion. Before I introduce our presenters, we do have a panel of really esteemed presenters. It was 1972. I was in my teens, and I can't but not mention Comrade Royal Cook and Sheldon MacDonald, who, along with myself, were the young Turks of the PNP Youth Steering Committee, which would meet at 25 South Camp Road with Comrade Leroy Cook. We are all adamant that the backward Shearer-led government had to go. It was part of the Babylon system, and that it was time for change. Not just any change, but one that meant better must come. Not just for some, but for the Jamaican people as a whole. The details of the change never mattered to us. Nothing could be worse than the Shearer-led JLP government. The social injustices, the racism and classism, the police brutality, especially against Rastafari, the poverty and marginalization of so many Jamaicans, the tribal politics and victimization, the banning of literature, the corruption. I would be in Western St. Mary with Tony Capleton and my younger brother Michael, who is on the platform, who was far more of a political activist than I was in East Road St. Andrew, being part of Eric Bell's campaign team. Sheldon and I would probably be the first two political victims of that campaign. Luckily to be alive after beaten, shot by Talbot Forest thugs, being hospitalized at the Port Mayor Hospital, having to flee 2 nights later, as there were credible rumors of JLP thugs coming for us. I remember going down the back stairs of the Port Maria Hospital, running through the cane fields to safety. But the pain and scars of that incident disappeared with the joy of the election victory on February 29. And oh, what a victory that was. Tonight, we have a panel of comrades who lived the 1960s and can share their experiences right up to February 29th, 1972, 50 years ago, and their expectations. And I start with of course, by welcoming former Prime Minister, the most Honorable Comrade P.J. Patterson, who would have been the campaign manager, campaign director in 1972. He would not have been a vice president then. His claim to fame was that he was young, gifted, and Black. He had recently become an MP in, I think it was Southeast Westmoreland, if I'm right, and was the campaign director. We also have our former party president, Comrade Peter Phillips, would have been a youth in that time. We are joined by Comrade Desmond Leakey, who would have been a candidate and soon to be member of parliament in that period. We are joined by Florizel O'Connor, who is here with us tonight, and Flo, Comrade Beverly Manley had some challenges and will be joining us, but won't be able to participate. So, fortunate or unfortunate, you'll be our only female panelist, right? We have Sefton Johnson, right, who would have been a youth leader at that time. Michael Burke, who is here. And we are hoping, we have Leroy Cook, sorry. We have Leroy Cook, sorry, right? who would have been with the party secretariat. And we are hoping to be joined by Scree Bertram, who I spoke with up to Saturday, and he promised he was going to try and understand Zoom. Comrade Patterson, I don't think Scree has done a Zoom meeting yet. He has been resisting the technology, but he promised he was going to have Claire try and get him on. And I spoke to Paul Miller, who should be here today. So we move on to just before Leroy with a music that sets the context, Everything Crashed. So that would give a kind of introduction to the situation. And now we invite Leroy Cook to briefly summarize the context of the period.
Thank you, Paul. The context briefly is this. In 1962, the PNP lose the general elections, which means that the party of self-government and the leader of the self-government movement and architect of the Independence Constitution, Norman Manley, does not get to lead the country into independence. The JLP, new government, does not address the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. In 1963, we see manifestations of anti-Rasta brutality in the Coral Gardens Bad Friday incident, where Bustamante, our prime minister, told the police, carrying all the Rastas dead or alive. If the jails can't hold them, Pie River Cemetery can. 1966, in Western Kingston, we see bulldozing, burning out, and dispersion of the Bacawal residents to build what was to be called Tivoli Gardens. An act that I would describe as an act of ethnic cleansing, except that the term hadn't come into popular usage at that time. This followed Siaga's blood for blood, fire for fire speech of October 1965. 1967, the PNP elections, PNP lose again. Norman Manley's revolutionary land reform program gets lukewarm support from the PNP. But more importantly, the government of the day, the JLP government, has instituted, this is a time when the electoral system is totally in the hands of the government, and the government of the day has instituted a two-tier voting system whereby people in areas that are suspected of being strong PNP have a much harder time getting registered to vote. Also, unprecedented gerrymandering, a term which we learned for the first time. That is a system where the constituencies are so designed to favor one party to win an overwhelming number of seats, regardless of the number of votes. For example, a new constituency of Central Kingston constituency was redesigned, or rather Kingston, which previously had 4 constituencies, now only had 3, and Central, which had been a strong PNP constituency, is redesigned to give the Jamaica Labour Party a very strong chance of winning. Similarly, in St. Mary, a parish which is a rather strong PNP parish, where we had 2 out of the 3 seats, the boundaries are redesigned to ensure that the Labour Party wins 3 out of the new 4 seats. PNP wins 1 seat overwhelmingly, and the JLP wins the other 3 by a very slender margin. So through this gerrymandering and 2-tier voting system, the JLP wins the election. Following the election, the 2-level economy grows more extreme. No, I cannot describe it better than Norman Manley when he said at the time, "We have seen since Independence Day, the masses of Jamaica have found little or no change in their social and economic way of life. More and more, Jamaica becomes a classic example of a 2-level economy." He goes on to say, at one extreme, there is an expanding and fast-growing upper section where life and its luxuries and opportunities expand. Better houses, better cars, more of everything that makes for comfort. While at the other extreme, he says, there is a depressed and poverty-stricken lower section burdened with terrible levels of unemployment, where the smaller farmer does not have enough land to make a living, where housing is deplorably inadequate, where conditions are hard and frustrating, and where, worst of all, opportunities for young people, girls and boys, are for the most part non-existent. And now, this breeding ground for extremism and violence has led significant numbers, some to repudiate their own country, some to reject the past and its achievements, and all to demand improvement and betterment and social and economic reconstruction. There was also widespread human rights violations, which had actually started from the previous term of the government, as exemplified, for example, in the denial of passports to people who were considered radical. Expressions of radicalism started to go underground, and there was, in fact, open talk of revolution, which became more and more frequent. There was a rise in Black Power consciousness, leading, this is 1968 we are in now, leading to the Rodney demonstrations being brutally suppressed by the police in October 1968. But at that time, what we see is that the intelligentsia and the masses are now finding common ground. We are also at this time under the influence, coming more and more under the influence of the US civil rights movement. Not just the movement, but the songs of that movement. Songs such as "I Shall Be Released," "Young, Gifted and Black." These songs resonate with Jamaicans. And of course, we are now developing our own protest music. "How long shall the wicked reign over my people? Beat down Babylon," and such songs. The time was ripe. It was looking for a man to fill the breach. In 1969, February, Michael Manley was elected PNP president. Immediately, the Jamaica Labour Party government called the parish council elections to test the new PNP leadership. So we had no choice but to carry Michael around the country in a 14-day blitz, introduction, one parish per day. He presented himself on that tour as a synthesis of Marcus Garvey, Bustamante, and Norman Manley. And clearly that is what he aspired to be. So on that introductory tour, from the second day, it became clear that the country was ready for him. This was solidified by a 3-year organizing campaign led by the PNP's organizing committee, chaired by young Vice President, yes, Paul, he was a Vice President, young Vice President P.J. Patterson, who his own by-election in southeastern Westmoreland served as a kind of dry run for the coming general elections. So we come to 1972, 29th of February, leap year day. The hour had come and the man had come. Hail the man.
Thank you, Leroy. Yeah. Thank you, Leroy. And we'll move to the next music, which is Hail the Man. And thanks for that correction.
What would you say to the coming of a brand new day, when the shadows are falling away, even from the eyes of your? Express it if you might, as the passing of the night and the coming of the light through a brand new door. How do you tell everybody everything will be well, and the sound of the splitting of the bell is just too good to ignore? You'll say, hail the man, that's your brother on the street. You say, hail the man, every time we meet.
So as Leroy said, hail the man. And tonight we are privileged to have an individual still with us, and we hope for a long, long time more, who was key and instrumental in that campaign. And I stand corrected. I keep remembering that 1969 BP elections, and I've not moved on from that comment. But welcome and thanks for being here. So we are now ready for your presentation, Comrade Patterson. And please go ahead.
First of all, let me congratulate you, Comrade Burke, for bringing us all together on this memorable anniversary. This year, we only have 28 days in February. We don't have a 29th, so this is the eve of that great victory in 1972. I don't know why you always allow me to begin by having to haul you over the coals. But once again, please remember, in fora like this, I much prefer to be addressed as former comrade leader than former prime minister, proud though I am to have been both. But this is a comradely meeting and I want to present myself as such. I know the memory of Wildman Street is at the forefront of your mind constantly. When I came dead last, getting a total of 69 votes. But I was only throwing my hat in the ring that morning at the insistence of a couple enthusiastic comrades who were telling me, let them know that you are preparing for that time when you have to move up to higher office. And of course, Leroy has corrected you. I was a vice president in 1969, the same election when Michael was elected leader. And I can share this with you. After the victory, we were out celebrating. We had met in Carl Hendrickson's suite at the Courtly Manor Hotel. And we were having a fine time, all of us, Michael included. And then we heard the 5 o'clock news, which was that Ivan Lloyd had resigned from the party, had resigned from his seat. And Michael turned around to me and said to me, PJ, you better get down to Claremont tomorrow morning as the vice president for the organization. That's the first time I was hearing that I had been so appointed. I had to go down. Mullings was way and above the candidate of choice of 7 people who offered themselves. And we brought him home successfully. As I said to you when you invited me, my contribution this evening is going to be slightly different from the others. There's much to celebrate, but what I want to use the limited time to do is to say what were the elements that contributed to our success, because elections are not won when elections are announced. Elections are won by the preparatory work that takes place and by what happens during the campaign as well as on election day. And in sharing these thoughts with you, I hope those in the present leadership of the party will be alerted to some of the things we did and some of the things which are necessary as you are going about the rebuilding process. As Leroy properly reminded us, the 2 main features of the 1967 elections were the process by which voters were disqualified from being on the electoral list, and secondly, the gerrymandering that took place. It was a very, very bitter blow for Norman Manley because he realized that this was his last hurrah. But he felt an obligation that before he departed from the helm, he would have to see to it that we had put in place the structure for a modern, competitive party, one which was equipped with the capacity to fulfill the mission for which the party was launched in 1938, namely to build a nation where all of us who live in it would be proud to call it home. A nation united, strong, resilient, able to hold its own among the sovereign nations of the world and to contribute meaningfully to the kind of universe which is inhabited by a single human race. I happen to be the chairman of that committee, and Leroy, who just spoke, was recruited. He was the youngest member of the committee. We are probably we are among the few survivors of that reappraisal committee. When we presented our report to party conference, we recommended a number of structural changes. One of them included the appointment of a chairman of the party, separate and apart from the leader of the party. We decided to have 4 vice presidents of equal status to prevent the hierarchical system where one who would run as first vice president didn't make it, was excluded from considerations for the leadership of the party at that level. So we wanted to get the best that the delegates in their judgment chose for that particular range of offices. We decided that the secretariat of the party had to be totally restructured. Indeed, we had to bring in some talents. It had to be run as a professional political organization, and people like Tony Phillips, Bobby Pickersgill, Pat Cooper, Ken Chinon were brought in. We also decided that since the incumbent general secretary was principally a person dealing with the administrative side of things, we had to recruit somebody who could marshal the forces on the ground. And to that end, we recruited Courtney Fletcher, who had a very, very considerable knowledge of rural Jamaica, because he had served as secretary of the Jamaica Agricultural Society. Then Norman Manley, when the report was presented, said, "I am sure the party is on a good path. It's time for me to go." The elections for succession were hotly contested. But it was not, as some have been writing recently, it was not a bitter campaign because both candidates had, we believe, something to offer, so that when Michael won the presidency, Viv Blake was returned among the 4 vice presidents of the party. And therefore, we were able to begin the rebuilding process on a platform of unity. With the advent of Michael Manley to the helm, it was a totally new ball game. People speak about his charisma, undeniably so. His oratorical skills, no question about that. Perhaps what is more important as we look back is that he brought with him a record of service and leadership to the working class movement of this country. Everybody knew he stood for the poor, for the oppressed. Everybody knew he had a passion for social justice. And he was dubbed very early as Joshua, because he was the one that was going to tear down the walls of Jericho, meaning the divisions of class and of race which permeated the society, meaning the social deprivation which prevailed, meaning the legacies which we had inherited both from slavery and the plantation system, such as the concept of master and servant relationship, such as the question of children born in wedlock and children born out of wedlock. And when he eventually did so, this song, No Bastard, No Do Again, meant something profound to the entire society in terms of reordering the structural relationships which existed. Now, armed with that, he sought to bring together the base of the PNP support. What is that? It comes from the people who inspired the foundation of the People's National Party in the first instance. Our teachers, our professional classes, what was described by Leroy as the intelligentsia, people who wanted to change the status of persons of Black ancestry. Yes, out of many, one people, but 75% of us have our ethnic origin on the continent of Africa. So the churches were with us. The trades unions, save and except for the BITU, not just the National Workers Union. And by that time, the National Workers Union had extended its outreach beyond sugar, beyond bananas, to include the tourism industry, which was expanding, and very, very importantly, the bauxite and alumina industry, so that in places like St. Anne, Manchester, St. Elizabeth, we were getting a foothold as a party that we never had previously. It will be remembered that we undertook a trip to Africa because Michael perceived that as a developing country, we had to form a collective effort in seeking to pursue our own interests and our own welfare. And the more united we could be on issues of economic development and the exercise of sovereignty, the better we would be. When he returned home, he brought with him the rod of correction. And I very well remember that meeting in Port Antonio. And believe you me, the campaign caught fire. We set about, first of all, restoring the base of the People's National Party by the revival of groups and by energizing them with a message that they could take to the people, and in providing them with the quality skills that would make them better canvassers and that would make them very effective on election day in the discharge of their duties. We had, as our unpaid organizing staff, people who were salesmen. At that time in our development, salesmen traveled all over the country to sell insurance, to sell rum, to sell cigarettes, to sell drugs. By drugs, I mean pharmaceuticals, medicines. And I can't tell you how invaluable they were, not only in relaying out there to their clients the message that we were seeking to convey, but also reporting to us on the strengths of the constituencies, those things which were seeming to influence people, where they thought we had been looking in the wrong direction in terms of finding candidates, and where they spotted people who were supportive of the party, supportive of the movement, and who wanted to contribute. And we enlisted them all. We had a formidable parliamentary group. We were numbered in parliament, yes, but led by Michael Manley with his effective debating skills, led by David Core with his incisive presentation pertaining to economic and financial affairs, led by Florizel Glasspool, who had a knowledge of Parliament that was exceeded by none. We had a mastery, a control of Parliament. And we had a middle bench. They were like terriers. Sidney Pagan, Winston Jones, Ernest Speart, Noel Silvera, and at times Keebleman would join them. I mean, the Labour Party quaked when they started to roar in Parliament. Even pugilists like Tavares and Wilton Hill and even Siaga himself certainly never had it their own way. It was never easy going. We had a shadow cabinet that functioned effectively, and those shadow cabinets all had task forces where we recruited people from the communities to work with us in the development of policy. I think, Comrade Burke, you will remember, at that time I was the person in charge of youth, sports and community development. And you yourself were a member of my committee, but we had people in it like Tony Bridge, head of the Jamaica Olympic Association. We had people like Batchelor, who had experience in the National Youth Corps, and other parliamentary spokespersons also had effective advisors. That meant we could control the public debate. In terms of the media, the PNP presence and the PNP message was always out there. Among the recommendations from our group were the building of the YO as an arm, and so the women's movement. And again, their work throughout the campaign was untiring and invaluable. I'll say it as plainly as I can. You cannot win an election unless the youth are on your side. So if the PNP is serious, the PNP has to find a way of reaching the youth. At that time, nearly everybody who was in secondary school, nearly everybody who was in any tertiary institution, nearly anybody who was in a teaching college or a vocational space was supporting the campaign because change is what they wanted. Now, in the interest of time, let me move quickly on to one of the introductions to election campaigning, which had never been witnessed before and which had a tremendous effect. When Michael brought back the rod of correction, Clancy Eccles developed it into a song. And the reception was so good that he, Buddy Poyat, Paul Fitzgerald, and myself conceived the idea of a bandwagon, which was a musical train which we took all over Jamaica. Every artist was fighting to be on the bandwagon trail. It was fun. It was appealing to everybody, irrespective of political color. It set the mood for the country. Everything crashed. Beat down Babylon. They're gonna take a beating. I mean, there's nothing before or since that's comparable to that. At the same time, we had some things that we call task forces, people who were not running for seats, but people who were giving the backup which were necessary. People like Vunny Isaacs and Bobby Jones in Kingston, people like Frank Pringle in the Montego Bay area. They were gathering persons in support of the party. It was a fine example of national mobilization. And the point I'm trying to make here is simply this: the party must go back to the days of extending its outreach. To do so, it has to have a consistent and appealing message. Our message simply was, better must come. For the elections, there was a combination of candidates, some of experience, people like A.U. Belinfanti, Howard Cook, who had served in the federal parliament. There were new candidates, people like Upton Robotham, who was in charge of South St. James, administered to all the sick and the elderly. You had people like Dallas Young, backed up by people like Ram Talley, who wasn't running for a seat at that time. You had Horace Clark bringing new energies and new visions into St. Mary. Then, of course, there was Tony spoiling the Trenchtown Rock in his own inimitable style. People like Eric Bell, Reverend Wrong Sounds Robinson in Hanover. It simply was an unbeatable team. Nobody had any doubt what the results were going to be, as was being said towards the end of the campaign, them gonna get a beating. We had backup, we had candidates to spare who weren't running, but they were supporting persons in other constituencies because their time would come. I can think of people like Roddy Lawson. I mentioned O.D. Ramtali. You had people in St. Anne's, Squee Bertram, D.K. Duncan. You had Paul Miller, not a candidate. We had more than enough political firepower, and we simply could not be matched. I just want to say the following in conclusion. There are some prerequisites for success in any campaign. You have to have a message which resonates. You have to have a sound organizational base, which you can't wait until elections are announced. That must be put in place from now. We have already lost a great deal of time. The paper groups can't work. They must be made effective. There must be a program of political education. You have to extend your broad community outreach. You have to find out what are the things that are causing problems in particular areas of constituencies, and you have to be out there addressing them with the people. And you have to have, during the campaign, good PR, good communications. We had people like Desmond Henry, Ralston Smith, and one of them from the office, Flo Connor, I'm sure will make her own contribution. You asked when you first contacted me, what was my experience on the victory? And I tell it in very simple and personal terms. My constituency, of course, is in the hills of Westmoreland. I traveled there to Montego Bay, where as the national campaign director, I had in the closing stages taken particular responsibility for Western Jamaica with Howard Cook. And all along the way, there were bonfires. Yeah. We could hear the drums beating along the way. And I tell you, the following morning, I had to get up to go to Withorn because Jim Thompson had just won by some 40-odd votes. And I had to go and do the legal recount before we could get some other lawyers to take over from me. And as I stood up in my vehicle and the people came out with their brooms and their tree limbs, because remember, we had used the tree as our symbol in the federal elections, and the people broke down the branches of trees and they were waving them in the air and sweeping the road before us. I cried all the way from Montego Bay to Withorn. Why? I felt this must have been how our ancestors felt when there was liberation from slavery. And that said one thing to me, and one thing to me clearly. We weren't taking this thing to play around. We had to embark on fundamental social transformation of the country. And that is why I was very pleased. I still regard myself as very honored to have been able to participate in that process of social transformation. It was the mandate which we got from our people. And I hope that we are going to find renewed energy to take on the task, because many of the problems which existed in 1972, the social alienation, the corruption, the lack of accountability, the victimization are still within our society today. The trumpet is sounding. We must answer the call. Thank you.
Thank you, former party president, Comrade PJ Patterson. I think I have your title right. Thank you very much for that whole experience. And I'm happy you asked to speak not just about the night of the victory, but what the party had to do to ensure it. Thank you so much for that participation. So we're now going to listen to a little bit of Peter Tosh, Them Have to Get a Beating.
For rights and justice.
unfavorable financial condition. I am unable to cope with this financial situation. It's causing an inflation upon creation. I can't stand this no longer. The wicked get stronger. I can't stand this no longer, cause the battle is getting hotter. But them have to get a big, the wicked have to get a big, yeah. They must get a big, yeah. The wicked have to get a big, yeah. Now that you waited till your back is against the wall, one step to progress, my brother, and I know Jah will help you all. And them have to get a big, Lord. Them must get a big, yeah. Them have to get a big, I see. And them can't get away. I can't stand this no longer. The wicked get strong.
Thank you very much, Alisa, for that. It was not the version, I made a mistake, the original version of the African meeting. That is a much later version of the very same song. But I want to welcome our former party president, Comrade Peter Phillips, to make his contribution. Comrade Phillips, good night, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I want to really greet all the other comrades and Comrade Patterson also, especially. You know, for me, I want to also echo the sentiments that were made before of thanking you, Paul, and those along with you who have chosen to commemorate this very important event of the 1972 victory of the People's National Party. It's hard to think that is 50 years ago, but it was a striking event for certainly me and I believe the entire country, as has been said, coming to an understanding of what independence should mean. Perhaps just speaking from my own experience, because while still at JC in 1967, we had tried, some of us, myself, young Pat Belinfanti, and others, sought to involve ourselves in that campaign. But having gone to UWI and become involved in the Black Power movement and then later Rastafari, there was a sense in which we were echoing sentiments of uncertainty about how the political system as a whole was going to carry us forward as young people, the first generation in a sense, having come out of high school after independence. But I think that was answered. You know, my memory of February 29th and more so March 1st was of a whole country almost celebrating the end of a long night of pain that was ended by the PNP victory. Spontaneous marches and motorcades were generated right across the country. In Kingston, in rural Jamaica, because of that victory. And I think we have to understand this, and certainly my experience of those years, having gone to UWI in 1967, and with a very sharp sense that independence was not delivering the kind of country which we had all wanted and which we all sought. the country was more and more polarized. While there was economic growth, as Leroy has mentioned in quoting Norman Manley, there was a clear sense of a division, a wealthy few and a whole marginalized, poverty-stricken majority. The emergence of the vast ghettos like Ghost Town. I can remember as a youth coming out of UWI and really encountering Ghost Town with its warren of lanes and shanties and lean-tos. That was almost a whole city within a city that time, and creating a whole new environment. There was, of course, the emergence of the violence and increasing social conflict of the period. First state of emergency that was taking place in West Kingston at the time, and which was the subject of teachings on the campus. There was the so-called Chinese riots of 1965, caused by the ill treatment, the alleged ill treatment of workers by Chinese shopkeeper downtown, and then the Rodney protest in which we are all involved. But marking that period also was the whole rise of various social movements, I guess you could call them, the independent trade unions in ITAC, Independent Trade Union Action Council. Then there was groups in the farmers, including out in Portland, who were beginning land seizures to take land that was being unused by big landholders. Then there was including also were the farmers up in St. Anne that DK and others were trying to organize, who were in conflict with the bauxite companies, who were embracing, controlling more and more of the land. There was the WLL got formed as a kind of Marxist movement, independent of and critical of the two parties. There was a Maoist version called YFNL, Youth Forces for National Liberation. And you are seeing this emergence of a whole anti-system tendency. And in many respects, for me, as part of the youth of that period, the election of Michael Manley to the presidency of the PNP ushered a whole new sense of awareness about politics, about the viability and potential of the established political party, and specifically the potential of the PNP. The PNP, as has been said, and Michael was on a road tour, but also the party was reaching out to many of us, young youths in Rastafari, youths. There was the youth movement. Paul Miller was leading a national youth movement. There were the sixth form students, people like Maxine Henry was active in that, and the PNP was reaching out to all of these independent groups, and essentially saying to us that there was a place for all of us, Rasta youth, high school youth, young farming youth. There was a place for all of us in this new phase PNP that was emerging. And by the time you reached, I think by the time you had the end of the Rodney movement, going through 69 and 70, certainly it was clear that there was no future for the Shearer-led JLP government. And it was a foregone conclusion that the People's National Party, that a new government would emerge led by the People's National Party. And I think it is important, for me at any rate, to point to the way in which in the immediate aftermath of that victory, the PNP, led by Michael and his cabinet, consolidated the links that were being formed, established a whole series of committees consulting, one with youth, I think you, Paul. I remember young Ivan Core being asked to be part of a committee looking at the problems of youth. They were reaching out to the cultural practitioners and activists and musicians. They talk of a national youth service and new directions in foreign policy. And that certainly set the stage for a united, revived national movement that was to lead the path of serious social reform and economic reform in the country that got underway in 1972 and gathered momentum after 1974. I think there are many lessons for us to learn, but we are now in a phase in the country that in many ways was similar to the kind of sense of hopelessness that had begun to spread in some elements towards the end of the 60s. And there are many lessons I believe we can learn. Many have been pointed to by Comrade Patterson that will be necessary for us to follow if Jamaica is to be able to revive the sense of mission for which the party was formed in 1938 to build a better Jamaica, offering opportunity to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Phillips. Thank you very much for that presentation. And while you spoke, I remember the reasonings we had with you at that SFA summer camp in Happy Grove in 1970. Certainly Brian Meeks would have been there, Tony Bowles would have been there, Ivan Core would have been there, Leslie Chang would have been there, Michael Hilton would have been there, right? And although many people are not PNP oriented, we are all opposed to Babylon. And we could identify what Babylon was. So you are correct.
And by the time you reach the middle 70s, everybody was saying PNP of that group.
Yeah, and that is correct.
Except maybe Biza, who was supportive of the party. But
they were progressive. They were progressive.
Yes, absolutely.
You name it, right? It was really a strong group of six formers. But thanks for the contribution, right? I mean, we have known it. Oh, I have known you since my first days at JC as my dormitory monitor, as one who never bullied us. So thank you for your contribution, Comrade Peter David.
I don't want to take responsibility for any mistakes you have made along the way, Paul. But anyway, we have known each other for very, very many years, probably going on about 60 odd.
Yeah, just right after independence, the 13th of January 1963 as a border. But I really want to thank you for that contribution. And I now want to turn to Flo Florizel, but very few people know that her first name is Florizel, Flo O'Connor. So I'm going to ask you to unmute Flo. Hold on, yes, I'm going to pin you. So welcome, Flo.
Thank you. Greetings to all listening, all present. I felt as if I was taking a walk back into days of despair, hope, triumph, and I'm now back into despair. But it was so strengthening listening to all the things that have been said. And what struck me is the similarity of experiences. For me, looking back, my major point is Walter Rodney. Why? Because for the first time, the University of the West Indies added African history to their curricula. And that's to me, when I look at all the people there, uh, sorry, are you hearing me? Something just came upon my
Yeah, I think you have to come on a little bit
this.
close. I think you have to come on a little bit closer to your microphone, Flo. Thank you.
Is that better? Is that
Yes, it
any
is.
better?
Please proceed.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Okay. Yes, when I look at where we are now, which I'm not going to be looking at, but I just want to say that the work of restoration is absolutely necessary. Now, when African history began for the few months, it awakened in a lot of us, well, a lot of persons, the knowledge that, yeah, you're worth something, you're somebody too. It began for people at the students at the university level to really start questioning the social disadvantage that had been existing and had been accepted by so many people for so long. So to me, the foundation was laid, albeit in a couple of months, but there was an awakening of consciousness of self, which augured well when it developed with what Michael Manley and the PNP was saying they stood for. It also opened doors to coalition of the poor, I like to call it. Two main examples. The day we took to the road spontaneously, don't care what anybody wants to tell you, totally spontaneously, there was a unity, it's giving me goosebumps, up from people like the Higglers, like the people selling sweets and stuff like that on the road, from the bus drivers who showed their support. Picnic go stand up for your education, you hear, you have to come better than me. Were the comments you were hearing. And when we were walking along, people would be handing us drinks, water, sweets, biscuits. And you got a sense that, yeah, this is all of us struggle. Truly, it was out of many one for that day at least. There again, the social transformation or the foundation for social transformation seemed to be to me was being laid. And I think I have to choose my words very carefully. But I think it also earmarked the development of a wider understanding that independence did not mean liberation. And people were getting ready, had reached a point where, based on the conditions in the country, they were seriously trying to understand, trying to work out programs for us to reach to liberation in the truest sense of the word. The bandwagon to which former party leader Patterson referred was another focal point in the mix between culture and breaking down the artificial social barriers. People, irrespective of party support or loyalties, attended those bandwagon sessions. Why? Because the artists of the period were faithfully reflecting the views of the majority of the masses. And so the role of music, when it is used to reflect the truth, as seen by the majority of us, cannot be overestimated or overstated. When Michael Manley became leader of the PNP, by that time, people had grown more aware of their self-worth. Their dignity had developed to a point, despite the fact that Black people were not welcomed as workers in places like the banks. And the few who went in, who got work early, had to enter by the back door. Those things began to come to light and began to be questioned quietly. Given the time, I just say that the slew of social justice and human rights legislation eventually passed under the PNP, under Michael Manley, brought to the forefront the number and the depth of deprivation, human rights violation, social justice lack that had existed hitherto. The fact that we are almost back at that place is small comfort. But the impact of seeing people looking like yourself in banks was tremendous in strengthening the feeling that we too are important. And I have chosen to speak on a personal level, so I will close by saying Black Power, for me, was nothing new. I grew with a family of free Africans who came to Jamaica way back when. So I was aware of the history which we were taught in schools about African Black people, or not taught, but also had vivid oral information. So when I left Queens High School and went to university, the first thing I did on leaving Queens was wash my hair. Because back in those days, your hair had to be pressed. The first thing I did was wash my hair. And so when I went to the university, every morning that I came off that bus, there was a group of other students laughing and pointing and jeering. Why? I was at that time one of 3 people, females on campus, who did not have clothes this year. Lo and behold, when Black Power, the phrase became a hype, those same people were coming to me to ask, how you comb your hair? How you fix it? And I answered with much glee inside and pleasure, because for me, it was a step in the right direction of acknowledging what is yours, who you are, and developing self-confidence. Manley's Bastard the Act, all said in, what's his name, My Leader Borneo, is well documented. But I do not think that enough attention has been given to monitoring and ensure that they are still respected and that things have really improved. The inclusion of more women in positions of authority is new in that it is now public, but you know, and everybody who has spoken so far know, that women have always been the engine in the society in getting things done, and maybe in a political party more than other places. I will end there. You did say 10 minutes, and I apologize for having not stuck to the time. But you asked for my personal reflections. I'll say one last thing which shocked me. In all the years I have heard Patterson speak, I never heard him speak of his experience election night 72. And I was struck a while ago because he was describing exactly what I was feeling on the road that night coming in from covering the elections in the country part. It was amazing to see bushes moving because not everybody had lamps. And the drums that he referred to, and some of the singing in the night coming home, and yet still there was no fear. There was such a sense of joy in the air that I felt exactly as he did. This must have been the way our ancestors felt when freedom morning came. And I would like to think that despite current situations and current disappointments, we did get back to the job of having a continuation of the very correct path, to my mind, on which we started. And I wish both political parties development. PNP has always put the people first. I wish more people in the society would do that. Remember the marriages that we went through in the past of our food stuff, starvation, food wasting. Let us not return to that period of want unnecessarily. Let us go back to the principles of Operation Grow. Grow what you eat what you grow, and involve all young people in the agricultural sector. Current events on the world should have brought that back to everybody. I thank you for this opportunity of rambling about experience, but I don't do well with Paul Burke as a chairman who is very time conscious. So I thank you for the leeway you have given me tonight. I'm honored to have been included in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flo. And the leeway is not just because you're a woman, but I know that the whole personal issue of how you have looked at culture, race, class, color, and what was happening in Jamaica, things that we take for granted,
Yes.
that many people were unaware of. And we could speak all night about some of those contradictions.
Yes.
But I really want to thank you. And I want to now invite Comrade Desmond Leakey, who has been with us from the beginning, to make his intervention. Desmond, you are much better than your colleague, Scree, because Scree has not been able to deal with the challenge. But we're going to try and tighten it up now. So please, Desmond, we welcome you. Desmond? Desmond is still muted. Desmond, can you unmute? Let me help Desmond too. Desmond, please unmute. Let's give him a little time, please, everybody. Desmond, go to the button at your left side of your screen and just touch it, and you'll unmute. All right, we'll come back to Desmond, hopefully. And I now invite Sefton, who is unmuted, to speak. Of course, you know, Sefton would go on to become a national chairman of the PNPYO. He would go on to become a senator, but at that time he was a youth leader. I used to think that Sefton's antecedents were rural until he informed me that he was a Kingston man who went rural. I don't know which one it is, but Sefton, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. I am really a rural man, but my extensive political experience began in Kingston, actually in southwestern St. Andrew. And during that period, I worked at various places. Notably, I first worked at the KSAC Income Tax Department, and then thereafterwards, my final place of working in Kingston was at the Dealer Company. And I was dabbling in politics. No,
go ahead, sir.
In 1971, I went to work with the Beacon in Montego Bay. And I got on the political platform in South St. James with Dr. Robotham. At the time, I was the youngest person in St. James who was speaking publicly. And I was owning my skills during that particular period. And there's something that you showed me recently, which I was unaware that I had appeared as a participant in a program. But nevertheless, I campaigned not only for Robotham, but I spoke in Hanover for Dr. King. And I somehow ventured into Western Hanover with Wrong Sound. That was Reverend Roy Robinson. So I was very, very much involved in the campaign. At the time, Better Must Come was the song that was played all the time. And then thereafterwards, we were excited about the victory of the People's National Party, and particularly the election of Robotham. He was a man who was practicing in the South St. James, the Maroon Town area. I used to call him the $2 doctor, because Dr. Robotham had fame beyond the constituency. As a matter of fact, I remember when my father, who was in England at the time, was sick with his back, my grandmother told him to come out to Jamaica to see Dr. Robotham, because somehow people had thought that Dr. Robotham was a four-eye man beyond his medical degrees. They thought that Dr. Robotham was somehow could see beyond what the natural eyes could see. But nevertheless, I had a very exciting time campaigning all over the place. And I am gratified to know that I was a participant during that period. I don't know if I ventured into Trelawney, but the place that I campaigned basically was in St. James and Hanover. And I'm grateful for the exposure that I got, and particularly with the comrade leader, I was able to move from there. And then after the 1976 election, the party leader tapped me to become a senator. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. That's my contribution, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Sefton. I remember you well in those early periods as a very articulate pretender of being a rural man, right? And speaking up for the farming community, right? Thanks for sharing, right? And let me try back now, if we can get Comrade Desmond online. Comrade Desmond, try and unmute for me. Desmond, can you unmute? Still trying to get Desmond to unmute. All right, so the youngest in the group of speakers would be Michael Burke, right? Who, as I said, would have been politically active even before I was. He too was actively involved in that campaign. Welcome, Michael. Michael, you're mute. Hold on, you're still muted. Hold on. Let me ask you to unmute. Where's Michael?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, you're unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Paul. The more I see what is going on, you know, and how everything has turned around, you know, it reminds me that, you know, there's no living happily ever after once you have made changes. You know, it's not some fairy tale writer like Grimm or Enid Blyton that wrote the script of life. Because all of the things that we were fighting for, you know, the end of oppression, etc., the end of the race thing and so forth, seems to have returned with a vengeance.
Yes.
You know, here it was that, yes, they boast that the economy was both growing in the 1960s, and yet people were barefooted, people were living in shanties, people were in the rural areas, were going for water on their heads. I was part of the PNPYO summer school in 1970, and in Hope Bay, in Portland, the parish with the most water in Jamaica, people were walking around, children with water on their heads. And even it was part of the campaign of Michael Manley, if not in the written advertisements in the paper, I think there was anyway, certainly on the radio station, he was saying, you know, we are going to bring about a day when children will not have to be walking, you know, walking with buckets on their heads for water. That is just to show what life was like, you know. The fact that, you know, there were so much, there were these classes, you know, and, you know, almost along the you know, shades of color and so forth. And it's as if to say we have seen a reverse in some of these things that were being fought for at that particular time. I was very excited about getting involved in politics. And later on, well, I felt a different sort of calling. But I walked into my MP's office, who was Florizel Glasspool. And in 1969, I found myself on a political platform for the councillors. PJ Patterson spoke about the by-election in Southeast St. Ann. And what was so immoral about the way it was done is that it was done on the day before the local government elections. And yes, Mr. Glasspool had a very clear mind about the the Constitution, Section 127 of the Representation of the People Law, and Section 44, I think. And he said, the finger, if you're going to stain the finger with ink one day, how will they vote the following day? And the JLP got around it by withdrawing their candidates in Southeast St. Anne for the local government election. And I've always asked a question, what would have happened if there were independents who had wanted to run? But they were so eager to try and get the seat, and that they didn't care about anything else but to get the seat. PJ Patterson, Mr. Patterson spoke about, you know, the team of professionals that were around at the PNP headquarters. One of the amazing things was that the Gleaner ran a competition as to who could spot the most winners. And the JLP won the parish council election, although PNP won the city. Had it been a general election, the PNP, this was in 69, would have won 27 seats, the JLP's 26 out of 53. And the winner of that competition was Ken Chinan. And I don't know if he just simply looked at how people voted in 67, but then that could not have been the total case. And at the age of 15, I went to the headquarters the night. Oh, by the way, Paul, yes, you're in your late teens, but in 1972, you turned 20 in June, right? But anyway, in 69, I saw this man of Chinese origin just writing into a book as the instruction, as the results came over the radio at the PNP headquarters at 25 South Camp Road. I saw people being surprised and people being joyful, whether sad or happy about certain victories. And he just continued writing with a sort of poker face, really. I heard when the new vice president, PJ Patterson, said that he was disappointed in the result. Wasn't it 55 votes that you got in 67, Mr. Patterson, or not 69? I think that was Dr. McNeil's figure. But anyway, he was a new vice president in 1969, and saying how disappointed he was. And yet Ken Chinan was able to assess the whole thing. The only result where he got wrong was in Cedar Valley, where the JLP candidate ran for as an independent, and he said the JLP would win, but he won as an independent. So there were real professionals, you know. I recall I recall going to the PNPYO's launch on the 19th of July, 1969, right? It would be the second time that I would be seeing Mr. PJ Patterson, because I was at the arena on November 10, 1968, approaching 15, when Norman Manley gave his valedictory address. And I met Mr. Eric Bell at that function. He was mayor of Kingston, and he was having a conference the following day in East Rural St. Andrew, at which Mr. PJ Patterson also attended and spoke. And in later years, I got to understand what he meant when he said that the JLP was caught napping in 1959. But the period was one where people felt, you know, we are immediately in the independence era and nothing seems to have changed. And this was really the story of the Rodney riots, where whilst the university students went out and protested.
Michael, don't block the camera with your hands.
Yes, while the university students went out and protested, the masses just came out and did their thing. And of course, there was vandalism and so on, but it had nothing to do with the university students. Orville Taylor wrote something a few weeks ago, and he was not fully correct. He spoke about Norman Manley agreeing with Mr. Shearer about the Rodney riots. That's not totally true. His first reaction was, well, I sort of understand, because he had to deal with the whole Claudius Henry thing. But anyone who heard David Core's speech would change their mind as to where the opposition stood. When David Core spoke with that same incisive mind that Mr. Patterson spoke about, and said there was not a shred of evidence that those pamphlets were printed at the university. And in later time, Mrs. Rodney would come out and say that they were printed at the Ministry of External Affairs. That was when she was on her way to Tanzania to meet her husband. And what I noticed was that only the Public Opinion newspaper carried the Mr. Core's speech. My father used to bring in the Public Opinion newspaper every Friday night, and I would devour it on Saturday morning. And I said, why didn't the Gleaner carry this? They never did. But that was the era that we were in. And it was an era when everybody was protesting. And even the protests that we had at Jamaica College, where I led a boycott of the tuck shop, it was a sort of spillover from the society, you know, of what was going on. And by the way, I was on political platform at the age of 15, speaking in Eastern Kingston. It was a sort of carryover from that mood in the society where we just wanted to see a change in everything, you know. Mr. Shearer became very, very unpopular when he told the police what they were to do with criminals. And he became very unpopular at the time because the Coral Gardens thing was only 4 years before that in '63. And then, of course, he banned all of these books. And of course, you know, and I think Black Beauty was also banned, and Black Beauty was a horse. But anything to do with Black Power, you know, anything to do with Stokely Carmichael, anything to do with Malcolm X, anything to do with even Martin Luther King, you know, were banned because I suppose the capillaries in the society that were supporting them with probably campaign funds, etc., did not want to have this type of thing. And Mr. Shearer's vision was certainly lacking. Now, the night of the election, when the PNP won, and Mr. Shearer was interviewed in Lionel Town, he blamed the churches for his loss. Yes, the churches had sided with the opposition PNP in the whole issue of the national lottery. But for him to just say that it was the churches that caused it meant that he really did not know what o'clock a strike. He did not understand how the society felt about him. He did not understand what sort of fundamental changes the society wanted. And he probably felt that, you know, being in the trade union there, the BITU, and getting some raise of pay for the workers, you know, was enough. And that was the extent of the liberation that they should have. Just the mere fact that on the night of the election, he blamed the churches for his loss. You know, the other things of the era, you know, that we probably could mention. You know, it was a time when people were really, a lot of the young people were really fighting both parties. I felt that both parties were irrelevant. And Michael Manley was able to bring back some relevance in their minds with that rod of correction. Some say he actually got it from Mr. Kenyatta, but officially got it from His Imperial Majesty. And you know, when that was used, you know, at a time when the whole Rastafarian ethos was growing in the country and people were thinking in terms of Rastafarian culture and Africa and so forth. It really and truly resonated with everyone. One other thing I'll never forget, you know, being invited to a YO meeting at the PNP headquarters and being asked to be a part of the summer school in Hope Bay, and going with Leroy Cook, who first had to stop in Northeast St. Mary, as it was then called, to see whether Horace Clark or Mr. Hopton Caven should be the candidate. And I got a first-hand look at how investigations were done in unrecognized constituencies. And I knew why Mr. Clark was a preferred choice, because the Clark family is very, very large in St. Mary. And of course, he actually, I think, was coming from a JLP family. So the family swung towards him. And then going into Hope Bay that night for a meeting at Mr. Broadbelt's place there. He was a railway station master. And then I did not really know I was going to spend the night, but I ended up in the home of Mr. Trevor King, who was very surprised to see me in his drawing room, and upstairs a shop in Port Antonio. And the next day, after a few meetings and so forth, and getting to know Mr. Affleck and so on, I went back to town. A lot of what I would have normally have said has been said already. So I think I'll stop here.
All right, thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah.
And I remember that Hope Bay session, Royal Cook was there.
Yes.
Sheldon came, I think, one night. I spent a couple of nights, and the water issue is true. We had to go down in the morning and bathe in the Swift River, right? We couldn't get water on the hill. I remember that very well. Right. I would have thought you'd have said more about your East Rural campaign, but
okay.
No, we're running for time. All right. So I understand that Desmond is having some problems to unmute.
Yeah. Well, I have those problems too, so I understand Mr. Bertram's situation.
Let me try to give Desmond one more. I really wanted to hear from Desmond, but I think he's off. I don't see him anymore. Right? So we're almost at 9 o'clock anyway. We're sorry we didn't have Comrade Beverly Manley, who had some other challenges, but I really have to thank the comrades who are able to participate. Comrade Leroy Cook for that context. Comrade PJ Patterson for speaking to how we got there. We didn't just get to February 29th. Comrade Peter David Phillips for reminding us some of the social issues, some of what happened, why we felt the way we felt against the JLP administration. Flo, from a different perspective, the issue of race, which many of us don't like to talk, the class, right? The complexion issue. Yeah. Sometimes some of us are brown, sometimes we're black, right? When it suits us, right? Some people who are brown in Jamaica never realized they were black until I went to the United States. So all of those contradictions. I'm sorry we not have Arnold Bertram. Would have been going on, I know, but he told us he'll be here. Paul Miller, for those who don't remember, there was a Jamaica Youth Movement.
Jamaica Youth Council.
Jamaica Youth Council, thank you. Right? And he really series of protests and all on the 25th. That would have included Peter David Phillips too, right? He would not have been able to vote, right? So Miss Paul Miller, Sefton for his intervention, that he was there campaigning. Michael Burke, who I know really kind of straight, but I'd want him to focus more on his campaign with Eric Bell, which I know he was part of that campaign committee. Our audience, those on YouTube, those on the Zoom platform, mainly of the YO 70s fraternity group. And I want to say this is not a nostalgic exercise. It's part of the documentation we are doing of the period to be broken down in shorter videos, part of that whole capture of information, which is so lacking of this period. So it's part of an exercise in which the YO played a role in that youth movement of the time. And not just us, there are so many youth groups at that time, including my good friend Milo Miles, Youth Forces for National Liberation. And I mentioned them because on the 30th of July, 1972, at the launch of the PNPYO, Milo and his group came into, and I have the pamphlet still, Youth Defend Youth, right? Youth Fight Imperialism. And some aggressive comrades ushered them out. And that was one of the first conflicts in the new YO, where many of us were very angry about how YFNL had been treated by PNP thugs or over-enthusiastic comrades, whichever you wish, at that. And I tell you, there were times when I actually wondered if I took the right decision of continuing with the PNPYO, or should I have been a member of Youth Forces for National Liberation. But events have overtaken that, right? I stuck with the People's National Party, and here I am. And as Peter David Phillips has said, he can't take responsibility for my development, right? As my first dormitory monitor at Jamaica College. I want to thank Norris McDonald. I want for being on the Zoom platform with us. I want to thank Maureen Denton and James Walsh for also joining us. So we're going to end with the music, Better Must Come. Thank you, comrades. Have a good night. And to the comrades on YouTube, thanks for joining on this platform. Better must come. Good night, comrades.
No.
Sorry, better must come, not better days are coming. Two different.
Better must come one day.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks to all the other presenters. It was really illuminating.
I assume that was done.
I tell you.
I've been trying a long time, still I can't make it. Everything I try to do seems to go wrong. It seems I have done something wrong. Why they trying to keep me down? Oh, God bless, no one curse. Thank God I'm not the worst. Better must come one day. Better must come. They can't conquer me. Better must come, yeah. I've been trying a long time, but I can't make it. No one to give me an helping hand. They only trying to keep me down. Oh, God bless, no one curse. Thank God I'm not the worst. Oh, my people get to see. They try to think must come one day. Better must come. They can't conquer me. Better must come one day. Better must come. Oh, better must come one day. Better must come. I better must come. Better must come. Better must go.
So good night again for the final time. We now close. And thank you, Dawn, for being here.